North Atlantic, February 18, 1943, 03:47. The deck of HMS Resolute pitched at an angle that defied physics. 15-meter waves swept the destroyer's bow, turning steel into something fragile, almost alive. Below, in the chart room, Lieutenant James Hartley watched the aneroid barometer fixed to the wall with his usual distrust. The needle wavered, not smoothly as it should, but in erratic jumps, tiny tremors that seemed unrelated to the actual atmospheric pressure. Every other instrument indicated relative stability: 10-12 millibars, partly cloudy skies, winds at 20 knots. But that barometer danced as if it were witnessing a storm that didn't exist yet. "Hartley, are you staring at that damned thing again?" Commander Pearson's voice cut through the hum of the engines. He was a broad man with a graying beard and eyes that had seen 3 years of submarine warfare. "I've told maintenance to chuck that thing twice already." "Sir, I know it seems. It seems broken because it is asterisk broken, Lieutenant. We have 3 barometers aboard. All the others show normal pressure. That one's junk. If you've got time to be watching ghosts, I need you checking the sea temperature charts." Hartley nodded, but his eyes drifted back to the instrument. The needle trembled again, small spasms to the left as if something invisible were tugging the pressure downward. He wrote in his field notebook, 0352 primary barometer, 1012 MB stable. Auxiliary barometer defective, erratic oscillation, inexplicable downward tendency. On the surface, Convoy HX-229 held disciplined formation. 42 merchant ships carrying grain, munitions, and fuel from America to England. Ringed by 6 naval escorts, they moved through the most dangerous corridor of the Atlantic, the zone where German U-boats hunted in packs. But that dawn, while the convoy sailed in apparently safe waters, James Hartley couldn't stop looking at the barometer no one else believed. James Hartley was not a meteorologist by training. He had studied physics at the University of Cambridge before the war, but when the Royal Navy needed officers who understood precision instruments, he was assigned to meteorological observation. His job was simple: read pressure, temperature, humidity, and send reports that helped forecast the ocean's behavior. But Hartley did more than that. He compared, he recorded, he looked for patterns where others saw only random numbers. The defective barometer had been installed on the asterisk Resolute asterisk 6 months earlier. Since then, it had wobbled irregularly, sometimes dropping sharply for no apparent reason, other times stabilizing when all the other instruments indicated a fall. The crew considered it useless. The commander wanted it removed. But Hartley noticed something odd. Whenever the defective barometer showed those little erratic oscillations, 18 to 24 hours later, a large-scale storm arrived, even when every other instrument predicted nothing. He checked the records. In November 1942, the barometer oscillated for 3 hours straight. The next day, a winter storm swept the convoy, sinking 2 freighters. In December, the same thing: inexplicable oscillations followed by 60-knot winds. In January again. Hartley took his notes to Commander Pearson. The response was clear. "Correlation isn't causation, Lieutenant. Storms happen in the North Atlantic. They always have. You're seeing patterns where there's only coincidence and a broken instrument." But Hartley couldn't ignore what he saw. He began to monitor the auxiliary barometer alongside the official instruments, recording every tremor, every tiny drop. And that early morning of February 18, while the convoy sailed under clear skies, the needle trembled again. At 09:15, Hartley interrupted Commander Pearson's breakfast. "Sir, I need to report something urgent." Pearson looked up from his porridge. "Hartley, if this is about that barometer." "It's been oscillating for 6 hours, sir. Identical pattern to the one that preceded the January storm. Official pressure at 10-11 millibars, stable. But the auxiliary barometer is showing intermittent drops. Micro variations, sir. I believe a severe low-pressure front is forming to the west. Pearson set his fork down. You believe based on an instrument 3 Navy technicians said is broken. Sir, I've reviewed the past 6 months of data. Every time this pattern appears. Every time this pattern appears, you see what you want to see. The commander's voice was firm but not cruel. Lieutenant, I respect your dedication, but we're carrying vital supplies to England. I can't change a convoy's route because a defective instrument is doing what defective instruments do. And if I'm right, Pearson stood. If you're right, we'll face the storm like we've faced all the others. But if you're wrong and I divert the convoy, we add 18 hours to the crossing. 18 hours for U-boats to find us, for German submarines to sink ships carrying the food British children need to survive the winter. Hartley said nothing. Return to your post, Lieutenant. Keep monitoring. If the official pressure drops, notify me immediately. But the official pressure didn't drop. At 12:00, every barometer on the resolute except one showed stability. The sky was partly cloudy, the wind moderate, and the convoy pressed on into deeper waters. Hartley went back to the chart room. The auxiliary barometer kept trembling. He set his hand on the glass as if he could feel what the instrument was trying to say. Then he made the decision that could destroy his career. At 14:30, Hartley left the chart room carrying a battered leather case. Inside, his meteorological logbook, 3 ocean current charts, and a sealed letter addressed to the Admiralty explaining his actions. He climbed to the upper deck and crossed the catwalk to the radio room. The operator, a 19-year-old named Davies, looked up. "Sir." "Davies, I need you to send an urgent message to Convoy Command. Meteorological priority code." The young man hesitated. "Sir, Commander Pearson's orders require all communications to go through him first." Hartley set the case on the table. "I know, which is why you won't mention this conversation to anyone until I say otherwise. Consider that a direct order." Davies swallowed hard. He knew Hartley, a quiet, methodical officer who had never broken protocol. Seeing that man now, face taut and eyes fixed, was unsettling. "What should I transmit, sir?" Hartley dictated. "Unofficial meteorological analysis suggests formation of severe low-pressure system 200 miles west-southwest. Recommendation: immediate diversion northeast, course 45, to avoid estimated impact zone in 18 to 24 hours. Source: independent instrumental observation. Responsibility: Lt. J. Hartley, HMS Resolute." Davies typed slowly. "Sir, this will cause—" "I know what it will cause. Send it." The message was transmitted at 14:47, 12 minutes later. Commander Pearson burst into the radio room like a human storm. "Hartley." The lieutenant stood by the window, looking at the horizon. He didn't turn. "Sir, you sent an unauthorized meteorological recommendation to Convoy Command. You disobeyed a direct order. You put your career, and possibly this convoy, at risk based on a broken instrument." Hartley finally turned. His voice was calm. "Yes, sir." Pearson clenched his fists. "Give me one reason not to put you under arrest immediately." Hartley opened the case and held out the logbook. "Because, sir, if I'm wrong, the worst that happens is I'm court-martialed and dismissed. But if I'm right and we do nothing, 42 ships and 4,000 men will face a storm without warning. And this time, sir, some of them won't survive." Pearson took the book but didn't open it. His eyes burned with anger and something else: uncertainty. "You've staked everything on this." "Yes, sir, I have." The reply from Convoy Command arrived at 16:00. Message received. Recommendation recorded. Awaiting confirmation from official data before altering course. Maintain current heading. Hartley was confined to his quarters. Pearson didn't formally arrest him, but made it clear the lieutenant was not to approach the bridge or the radio room until further notice. In the improvised cell, a small officer's cabin, Hartley sat on the narrow bunk and opened his notebook one last time. He reviewed every note, every recorded oscillation, every storm that followed. If I'm wrong, he thought, I lose everything. The career, the credibility, maybe even my freedom. But if I'm right and nobody listens, asterisk. He closed his eyes. Outside, the sea stayed calm, the sky partly cloudy, the wind moderate. At 18:00, the sun began to set in the western horizon, a quiet, golden, almost peaceful sunset. At 20:00, official atmospheric pressure remained stable, 1010 millibars. At 22:00, the night watch took over. The convoy held perfect formation. And then at 23:34, something changed. The communications officer aboard HMS Wanderer Asterisk, one of the flank escorts, sent a brief message to the Resolute Asterisk, primary barometer registering sudden drop. 1010 to 1003 in 15 minutes, wind increasing, requesting confirmation. Pearson read the message twice. Then he walked to the cabin where Hartley was confined and knocked on the door. "Lieutenant, I need you on the bridge, now." When Hartley entered the chart room, he saw what he already expected. All the barometers, including the official ones, were plunging. Pressure had fallen to 998 millibars and kept dropping. The wind, 20 knots 2 hours earlier, now reached 35. Pearson looked at him. "You were right." Hartley didn't answer. He stepped up to the auxiliary, defective, barometer and watched the needle. It had stopped oscillating. Now it pointed firmly downward. "Sir," Hartley said, voice steady, "we need to send the alert now. We have maybe 3 hours before the storm hits at full force." Pearson hesitated only a second. Then he turned to the radio operator. "Davies, send code red to the entire convoy. Severe storm confirmed. All vessels prepare for heavy seas. Emergency diversion northeast, course 45. Execute immediately." The message went out at 23:41. 18 minutes later, the sky exploded. What struck convoy HX-229 that night was no ordinary storm. It was an extratropical cyclone, a spinning mass of polar air that had dropped from the Arctic and collided with the relatively warm Atlantic, generating 80-knot winds and waves over 20 meters high. At 00:15, the first giant wave swept Resolute's Asterisk deck. The impact tore away 2 lifeboats and crumpled metal like paper. Hartley, strapped to the chart table with an improvised safety belt, saw the world tip sideways. Water flooded the bridge. The instruments went dark. And then, for an impossible instant, the entire ship seemed to float in the void. "Everyone hold on." Pearson's shout was swallowed by the roar of the wind. Resolute heeled to starboard, 35 degrees, 40-45, and then miraculously righted. But across the convoy, chaos spread. 2 merchantmen, which hadn't received the warning in time, were caught unprepared. One of them, the SS Normandy Asterisk, an oil tanker carrying 8,000 tons of fuel, began to list under the pounding waves. Her crew sent a desperate SOS before the radio failed. But most of the ships had received Hartley's alert. They had altered course, reduced speed, and battened everything down. They were prepared. And that made all the difference. By 01:30, the worst had passed. The wind fell to 60 knots. The rain turned to dense fog, and gradually reports began to come in over the radio. HMS Wanderer, structural damage but operational. SS Manchester, cargo partially loose, no casualties. SS Liberty Star, auxiliary engine damaged, proceeding under reduced power. One after another, the ships reported survival. Of the 42 vessels, 40 survived. Only 2 were lost, and both were ships that, due to communication failures, had not received the warning in time. When the sun rose at 06:47 on February 19, the Atlantic was calm again, clear skies, and on the horizon the silhouettes of the merchantmen pressed on, battered but alive. In Resolute's chart room, Hartley stood before the auxiliary barometer. The needle had begun to climb. 1,002 millibars, 1,005, 1,008. He set his hand on the glass once more. "Thank you," he whispered. 3 days later, Convoy HX-229 reached Liverpool. The docks were crowded with journalists, Admiralty officials, and families waiting for those who had survived. News of the storm and of the warning that saved the convoy had already spread. But James Hartley was not welcomed as a hero. He was received as a man under investigation. At 14:00 on February 22, he was summoned to a conference room at Naval Headquarters. Seated at the table were 3 senior officers, each with decades of experience in navigation and meteorology. In the center, Admiral Sir Geoffrey Hamilton, a 60-year-old with a stone face and unblinking eyes. "Lieutenant Hartley," Hamilton began, "you are here because you disobeyed direct orders, transmitted unauthorized meteorological information, and based operational decisions on an instrument declared defective by 3 certified Royal Navy technicians. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "And you did this knowing you could be imprisoned, knowing you could put 4,000 lives at risk, knowing your career would end?" "Yes, sir." Hamilton opened a folder. "At the same time, records confirm that the barometer you mentioned displayed oscillations which, with statistically significant consistency, preceded the arrival of severe weather systems over the past 6 months. Correct?" Hartley hesitated. "Sir, I'm not a certified meteorologist. I can't explain why the instrument behaves like that. I can only say that it does." One of the officers to Hamilton's left leaned forward. "Lieutenant, instruments do predict storms. They measure current conditions. What you're describing is impossible." "I know, sir, but it happened." There was a long silence. Finally, Hamilton closed the folder. "Lieutenant Hartley, you are removed from active service immediately and transferred to the Meteorological Instrumentation Division in Portsmouth. There, you will work with engineers to determine whether there is any scientific explanation for this barometer's behavior. If there is, we will adapt our protocols. If not—" He paused. "Then we'll be fortunate that your stubbornness saved lives rather than cost them." Hartley was dismissed. As he left the room, he heard Hamilton murmur to one of the officers, "He staked everything on a hunch and got lucky." But it wasn't luck, and Hartley knew it. Portsmouth, March 1943. The Meteorological Instrumentation Division occupied a red brick building at the back of the naval base. It was a forgotten place where old instruments were tested, calibrated, and eventually discarded. Hartley was assigned to work with Dr. Edmund Cassidy, a 55-year-old engineer who had designed barometers for the Navy before the war. Cassidy was skeptical. "Lieutenant, I've read your report. With all due respect, what you're describing runs counter to everything we know about atmospheric pressure instruments." Hartley set the auxiliary barometer on the table. "Then help me understand why it does." For 2 weeks, Cassidy disassembled the instrument piece by piece. He tested the aneroid capsule, checked the calibration, examined the pointer linkage. Everything seemed normal except for one detail. The aneroid membrane, the heart of the barometer, was slightly deformed. Not enough to make the instrument useless, but enough to make it different. "Look here," Cassidy said, pointing to a small ripple on the metal surface. "This capsule was subjected to an extreme pressure change at some point, probably during a severe storm. It deformed but didn't break. And that makes it react differently." "Perhaps. A deformed membrane can be more sensitive to micro variations in atmospheric pressure. changes so small that standard instruments don't detect them. And those micro-variations might be the earliest signs of a low-pressure system forming hundreds of miles away. Hartley felt something spark inside him. So the barometer wasn't broken. It was *2* sensitive. Cassidy nodded slowly. It's a theory, but if it's correct, it means we accidentally created an instrument capable of detecting storms before they fully form. They spent another month testing the theory. Cassidy built replicas of the deformed membrane and installed them in other barometers. Hartley monitored them all, comparing their readings with official meteorological data. And the theory held. The defective barometers detected pressure falls 12 to 18 hours before conventional instruments. They weren't failures, they were early warnings. In April 1943, Cassidy sent a report to the Admiralty. The title, Early Detection of Low-Pressure Systems Through Sensitized Instrumentation, Implications for Maritime Navigation in Combat Zones. The response came 2 weeks later. Report received. Research approved for further development. Prototype instruments to be tested aboard 6 North Atlantic escorts starting May 1943. Hartley was not mentioned in the official report. His name didn't appear in any document. But he didn't care, because he knew the truth. August 1945, the war had ended. James Hartley was demobilized and returned to civilian life. He found a job as a physics teacher at a secondary school in Suffolk, where he spent the next 30 years teaching teenagers about atmospheric pressure, thermodynamics, and the importance of observation. He never spoke about the barometer. He never mentioned Convoy HX-229 or the storm that nearly killed 4,000 men. But the technology he helped uncover was not forgotten. In the years after the war, the Royal Navy developed a new generation of ultra-sensitive barometers, capable of detecting atmospheric variations up to 24 hours in advance. These instruments were installed on merchant ships, naval escorts, and eventually at coastal weather stations around the world. Thousands of lives were saved, storms were forecast, ships changed course before danger arrived. And no one knew it had all begun with a stubborn lieutenant who refused to ignore a defective instrument. In 1978, James Hartley died at 62 of heart failure. His obituary in the local newspaper took up 3 lines. James Hartley, retired teacher, Royal Navy veteran, survived by his wife and 2 children. No mention of the convoy, no mention of the storm. But in Portsmouth, at the Meteorological Instrumentation Division, there is still a small bronze plaque on the wall. It reads, "In memory of those who saw what others could not, 1943. Below the plaque in a glass case sits the original auxiliary barometer from HMS Resolute *. The needle is still there, motionless now, pointing to 1013 millibars. And sometimes, on stormy days, technicians working in the building swear the needle trembles, just a little, as if it were still trying to warn someone." North Atlantic, present day. Today, modern ships cross the North Atlantic equipped with technology James Hartley could never have imagined. Weather satellites, Doppler radar, computer forecasting systems capable of modeling storms days in advance. But the essence of what he discovered remains. In 2018, during a World Meteorological Organization conference in London, a Norwegian meteorologist presented a study on detection of barometric microvariations as early indicators of extratropical cyclones. He cited 47 scientific papers, 12 case studies, and 3 decades of satellite data. At the end of the presentation, a BBC journalist asked, "Where did the original idea for this technique come from?" The meteorologist hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know. The earliest records date from the mid-1940s, but the names of the original researchers were lost. Probably someone in the Royal Navy during the war. Probably. But in Suffolk, in a small secondary school where James Hartley taught for 3 decades, there is still a plaque in his honor in the physics classroom. It was placed there by former students who never knew about the storm, the convoy, or the barometer. It says only, observe, question, trust the data even when no one else does. And perhaps in the end, that's what matters. Not recognition, not glory, but the simple truth that sometimes saving lives means believing what you see, even when everyone around you laughs. Even when the instrument is broken. Even when you're alone. Because in the end, the ocean doesn't care about patents, protocols, or official approvals. It cares only about who's paying attention. And James Hartley was. The real question is, how many James Hartleys are there today, staring at defective instruments being ignored, waiting for someone to listen? And if one of them is you, I hope you send the message.